The comedian Jimmy Carr has caused quite a stir. He's been heavily criticised for making a joke about troops who've lost their limbs on the front line. Soldiers posting messages on army websites suggest these gags are the only way to deal with such realities of war. The comedian, during a show in Manchester last week, said, "Say what you like about these servicemen amputees from Iraq and Afghanistan, but we're going to have an effing good Paralympic team in 2012. So, is that funny, or did Jimmy Carr simply go too far? Let's get the views of Conservative MP and former soldier Patrick Mercer and stand-up comic Gráinne Maguire, who both join me from central London. Very good evening,
Good evening.
to you both. Patrick Mercer, was that over the line?
I think it was, Jeremy. Thinking back to my days in the army, I suspect that these sorts of jokes might have been received by soldiers if they were made by soldiers, but I don't really think that's the audience that we're worried about. I find it utterly distasteful that the wife, the mother, girlfriend, whatever, of a soldier or man or woman soldier who is out there should have to listen to this stuff. I think Mr. Carr has gone too far with this one. I think it's distasteful.
Gráinne Maguire, your thoughts?
Well, I think it's distasteful that a Conservative MP is calling for the end of a comedian's career just for doing his job. I mean, it's the whole point of satire, to point out what's wrong with this society. I think people should be angry that there's going to be a generation of men and women maimed, but I think they should be angry at the government, not for a comedian for pointing that out.
Patrick Mercer, I mean, you were in the army for a good few years. I've certainly been in a few wars with British soldiers, and dark and darker comedy is the way they tend to deal with most of the outrageous misfortunes that beset them.
Absolutely. Gallows humour by soldiers, amongst soldiers, for soldiers is one thing. But Jimmy Carr is not a soldier. I'm surprised. I'm delighted that he has worked with injured soldiers in the past, but this is very distasteful on the eve of Remembrance Day. And as I've said already, probably serving soldiers won't be too concerned about this. Who will be concerned are their families and those who are thinking about sending their sons and daughters into the armed forces. I really don't think this is a good move at all.
Gráinne, I mean, are there no limits then to humour? Are there no boundaries of taste and good taste? Can a comedian say anything they like?
Well, I've been listening to the new Conservative coming up. I didn't realise that censorship was part of their new form for government. I don't know whether they're always that interested in stand-up or just the year before a general election. I think it's part of a comedian's a side effect of free speech, of a satire that's come all the way from Swift to Dickens, that you are allowed to say what you like. It is your job as a comedian to poke out what you think is wrong with a society and joke about what you want. It's not up to a government to decide what a comedian can make jokes about.
No limits, though, Gráinne?
No limits. Well, who decides? Is it the Conservative government who's going to decide what comedians are allowed to make jokes about? Because I think other governments have tried that, and I don't think censorship has always worked quite successfully in the past.
Patrick Mercer.
Look, Gráinne, I'm not a member of the government. The Conservative Party is not in government yet, and who knows whether they will be or not. That's not the point. I don't speak as a politician. I speak as a former soldier who works amongst the former military community extensively, who talks every day to constituents of mine who are serving, their wives, their girlfriends, their mothers, their husbands.
It's only soldiers who are allowed to be offended. Surely as a human being we can be offended by the massacre that's going on in Iraq and Afghanistan, and Jimmy Carr, as a comedian, as a writer, is allowed to use his art form to express his anger about it. It's not up to somebody else to tell him what he can and cannot write about.
I think what I'm pointing out is that this, I believe, is distasteful. I think he's gone too far. And
it's your opinion that it's distasteful.
Of course, but
and
it's your opinion.
Jimmy Carr's opinion that it isn't. And as we live in a free democracy where free speech is valued, then we are allowed to listen to him, make jokes about what he wants to make jokes about.
Of course, we live in a democracy where our soldiers, sailors and airmen are fighting for that freedom of speech.
Fighting for the free right to speak.
Important.
Exactly, that's what we're fighting for.
But I do think that he's gone too far with this. As I say, it
but
won't be the servicemen and servicewomen.
That's your personal opinion.
But that's your personal opinion.
And we live luckily in a society where we're allowed to say what we want.
Gráinne, surely the judge in the end is the court of public opinion, isn't it, really? If you start to get a bit of a reaction, as there clearly has been in this case, not just from Patrick Mercer, but, clearly from a pretty broad range of people, including some of the soldiers' families, it does start to put the sort of range of comedy into perspective, doesn't it?
Well, actually, as a comedian, you know very quickly if you've crossed the line with an audience, because they will not laugh and they will boo. All this controversy has been whipped up after the actual performance. So Jimmy Carr goes on stage, tells some jokes in context of a stand-up performance, and then newspapers afterwards, with the need to build up some controversy to sell newspapers, suddenly decide that it's this big deal, and MPs go on and talk about it, and it spins completely out of control. If you look at actually reports of how his performance went down, well, it all depends on what newspaper is reporting it. And there were reports that people were laughing. It's a joke. It's in context of all the other jokes in the night.
It's certainly a very sensitive area at the moment, Patrick Mercer, isn't it? And I guess, you know, we've got a bit thin-skinned about all this at the moment because our troops are under fire and in the front line.
I think we deserve to be thin-skinned, not so much the blokes that have been, it's mainly blokes and some women that are getting killed out there. I don't think this is directed so much at them as to those who support them, those who have to pick up the pieces when these guys come back without legs and without arms, the mothers who constantly spend their time with fear gnawing at their stomach about what's going to happen to their lad, and suddenly they find an extremely well-known and popular comedian taking the rise out of injuries that these boys are likely to suffer.
Sorry, there was no way that joke was the injured soldiers. There's no way they were the butt of the joke. The actual joke was the fact that there is a whole generation of young men and women who are going to be injured and killed as a result of a war that not many people see the point of. And if that's not something to joke about, something to point out and be angry about, well then I don't know what is.
I didn't see it that way, I'm afraid, Gráinne. I found this offensive to the soldiers, sailors and airmen who are fighting and dying for us.
But you're being offended on behalf of somebody else. That's no way of judging what is allowed and what isn't.
Well, let people make up their own mind, shall we? Gráinne Maguire, Patrick Mercer, thank you very much for thrashing it out in public for us. Appreciate it. You're watching Sky News. Coming up at 7 o'clock, can a computer game make you healthier? Up next, Colonel Gaddafi's been talking to Sky News exclusively. Among the things...